Czechs discover women rule. Weaselmoot male players are schooled. And renegade dipsets sound cool. I'm David Hood of the Diplomacy Broadcast Network, and this is Deadline, DBN's monthly news program. Dateline, October 2022. For our feature story, we all know that it takes certain specific skills to succeed regularly in diplomacy competition. Developing those skills requires patience, perseverance, and practice. But is there a side benefit to improving your diplomacy acumen? What can you learn in the play of our game that could benefit you in real life? Whether that could be in your career, in relationships, or in other leisure activities. Later in the program, we'll discuss this topic with three experienced hobbyists who all approach the question with different professions, backgrounds, and perspectives. But first, a look at headlines from around the world of diplomacy. Avalon Hill Game Company, at one time headquartered in Baltimore, began producing the physical board game Diplomacy in the mid-1970s. It later released additional versions both as a standalone company and as part of the Hasbro Toy and Game Company. In the latest episode of Deadline, I described available online retail avenues for the sale of the latest Avalon Hill version of Diplomacy. Now, Renegade Game Studios in California has just announced that it is licensing with Hasbro certain established Avalon Hill game titles for republication starting next year, 2023, and Diplomacy is on that list. The others are Axis and Allies, Squad Leader, and Robo Rally. The plan here is to push the new product through all three main distribution channels: the hobby market, the mass market, and the specialty market. A link to this exciting announcement can be found below. As we tape this episode, the World Diplomacy Championship for face-to-face play, the World DipCon, is approaching quickly. The 2022 event will be held at the Mount Snow Resort in Dover, Vermont, November 4th through 6th, with 4 rounds of diplomacy scored using the Carnage scoring system. Tournament director Dave Maletsky is the subject of this month's featured interview, so stay tuned for more information about this event coming up in, say, about 7 minutes or so on this show. In the meantime, let me emphasize that other DIP tournament opportunities throughout the world are available in November, including the Italian National Championship, November 18 through 20, the Bangkok Open in Thailand, November 26 and 27, and the French National Diplomacy Tournament in Paris that same weekend, November 25th through 27th. Links to the WDC and all the rest can be found below. Why not finish off your 2022 diplomacy season with a bang? Make your attendance plans now. The Journal of Political Science Education recently published a paper from Jakub Drmola and Josef Kraus of Masaryk University in the Czech Republic, and it's on the topic of diplomacy and gender. Using data from 6 years worth of university experience in using our game of diplomacy to help teach strategic thinking, the authors were testing the common belief that the use of board games such as diplomacy in education would unfairly disadvantage female students due to lesser exposure to similar games. Let me quote from the abstract. The results show that while male students are more experienced in playing similar games, had an easier time understanding the rules, and showed stronger engagement, this did not translate into considerably better performance or grades, and even led to higher levels of disappointment with their own performance. Really? You think? We could have saved you some work there, guys. In 2022 alone, Tanya Gill won DipCon, Siobhan Nolan repeated at Cascadia, Katie Gray won the Summer Classic, and Saren Kwok just took Weaselmoot. A link to this article abstract can be found below, but yeah, women dippers pretty much rock. Diplomacy World's 159th issue for the fall of 2022 was just released on October 2nd. Editor Doug Kent has given us a tremendous amount of good content in this issue, including a great piece by Nicolas Sahuguet about the mathematics and other intricacies of guessing games, There's a second article heavy on numbers as longtime Dipzine publisher Andy Lachette analyzes which spots on the board get attacked by which powers based on the data for 15 recent games. And then there's a recently completed Weasel Moot review by no less than 3 of its attendees. As the hobby's flagship publication, Diplomacy World is an invaluable resource, both for experienced hobbyists wanting to keep up with the dipdom goings-on, as well as for new players trying to learn the ropes. A link to this issue can be found in the show notes below. And if you've never been a DW reader, I encourage you not only to review this particular issue, but to check out some of the back issues. Literally, they're all available on the website, dating all the way back to issue number 1, published in 1974. Now, let's take a trip around the world of YouTube channels and other diplomacy content creators to report to you on the latest and greatest new diplomacy products from what we call our DBN media partners. One of the newest YouTube producers, Spluak, just released a video he calls the craziest game of diplomacy ever. Honestly, that's a strong statement given the insanity this reporter has seen over the decades in the diplomacy hobby, but still. The Blitz game that Spluak features does indeed contain its fair share of good old-fashioned nuttiness. See if you think it's the craziest. Also, check out the September 30 edition of our hobby's weekly emailed newsletter, the Diplomacy Briefing, for pictures from both Weaselmoot and SpireCon, as well as an insightful article from Saren Kwok about just what she was thinking as she went for it in the last round of an event I'm about to report on in approximately 15 seconds. Check out these products, as well as other offerings on the media page of the North American Diplomacy Federation website, or by visiting the links provided below. And now, Weaselmoot. The tournament put on by Chicago's Windy City Weasels just completed its 16th annual event run by organizer Sabia Huja, and Saren Kwok from the United Kingdom snagged her first face-to-face tournament win. Morgante Pell of New York City came in second, with perennial contender Ed Sullivan of Texas taking the third position. Saren sealed her victory with a powerful third-round performance as Italy, blitzing the Austrians while at the same time keeping Russia and Turkey at each other's throats, to finish at a dominating 15 centers at the end of 1908. You can watch full coverage of all 3 rounds of the event, plus Ed Sullivan's back-channel interviews of various players at Weaselmoot, right here on this same Diplomacy Broadcast Network you're watching for this show. The links to both videos can be found below. The 2 English language leagues for virtual face-to-face diplomacy play each hold game days soon on the VWDC Discord server. First up, on October 22nd, will be the Virtual Diplomacy League with its usual 3 rounds, including at least one that's appropriate time-wise for any hobbyist throughout the world. After the September matches, the VDL is currently led by Frenchman Nicolas Taillet of Paris, with Florida's Tim Crosby nipping at his heels in second, and DBN's own Brandon Fogel in Chicago in the third slot. There's only 2 more game days on the schedule after this October one. A link to the VDL section of the DBN website can be found below, as well as an invite to the VWDC Discord server where you can join in that league or the next league, which we call the Tour of Britain. Speaking of which, the tour continues on October 29th and 30th for its final 2 rounds on the way to crowning this year's King or Queen of the United Kingdom. Can one-time leader Zachary Moore of Minnesota take that league championship this year to go along with his commissioner role as from the other league, the VDL? Well, gosh, we'll see. It's time to talk about diplomacy's big dance, the DBN Invitational, a virtual tournament organized by this here network, now in its 3rd year of competition. 28 competitors will cross swords in February 2023 for the chance to reach the top board and then become that year's DBNI champion. How can someone become one of that 28? All participants in qualifying online, face-to-face, and virtual face-to-face leagues and tournaments are eligible to receive DB&I qualification points based on performance and the size of the event. And the winners of the big enough events will receive automatic bids. The remaining slots of the 28 are filled by at-large qualifiers based on those point totals. DBN's Countdown show just released its latest episode live from Weaselmoot, in which the current standings were released. You can check out who's in, who's out, and who's still on the bubble by pressing the link below to watch that latest countdown. And now it's time for a segment which we call My Favorite Things. We'll interview a diplomacy player about that person's diplomacy journey and then talk about something of particular interest to that hobbyist, whether or not related to diplomacy. This month, we talked to longtime diplomacy hobbyist and personality David Maletsky about how he got into the game and about his preparations to host the World Diplomacy Championships in Vermont just a few short weeks from now. Hello, Dave, and welcome back to Deadline.
Thanks.
I'm sure that our viewers will be interested to hear your report on how things are shaping up for World DipCon coming up here soon. But before we get to that, tell us a little bit about your diplomacy origin story.
I learned the game around 13 or 14, playing with some friends who's a buddy of mine had inherited a bunch of bookcase games from his dad, and we were trying all of them one by one, and those games were pretty brutal. People getting locked in closets to generate NMRs and whatnot. Then there was a 25-year hiatus, and I rediscovered the game by going out to Denver when I was in grad school in Nebraska to a tournament that one of my buddies was attending.
And obviously, you've been playing ever since. There must be something about diplomacy that hooked you. You are a games player in general. Is there anything about diplomacy that you think is substantially different from just another, good board game that you like?
Well, there's I think good and bad. It's as an example of the bad, I know player elimination is frowned upon in modern game design theory, but there's a lot of good. First and foremost, it's the hobby rather than the game, I would say. But speaking about the game itself, probably the best thing to me is the constant challenge and the layers of challenges. When I started out and became eventually an above average player, I was I think getting more frequent solo victories than in recent years. I was doing it by creating a cluster of confusion and angst on the far side of the board for me, typically. And that didn't feel great over the course of time. So ever since then, I'm seeing how I could succeed potentially without making people miserable over a board game, or at least less so. And then also, once you've played enough in enough iterations in enough events, you discover that the metagame itself is also a unique challenge, and that you have to be able to maintain an image that will profit you, but also be perceived as reliable and trustworthy to others, which is a great challenge.
When you say metagame, just for people that might not be familiar with the term, because different people watch this with different levels of experience, tell me what you mean by that.
So there's the skill set you need when you're playing a single game of diplomacy. But distinct from that, if you play multiple iterations of the game with the same people, there's going to be reputational elements that will impact your play and results. So there's good and bad. So a bad example of the metagame would be two people show up to a tournament and they were planning on working together the whole time before even the games had begun. But a good metagame example would be if you've tried to work with somebody 6 times in a row over the course of many iterations and they always lie to you, then eventually you've got to learn the lesson and expect them that they're going to lie to you in the next instance and react accordingly.
Fair. Well, you're obviously a longtime face-to-face player who has also participated very much in the virtual hobby, which we formed sort of during the COVID lockdown. Not everybody in the face-to-face world made that transition. How did you do it, and why did you do it?
Mostly I did it by listening to Tanya. I think Tanya was the primary reason I'm no longer fully incompetent with Discord. Why I did it was just because that was the way the wind was blowing, is the short answer. Us old timers are not the future. So, I certainly don't want to lose touch with the old timers. They're my friends. But on the other hand, you have to make small first world accommodations to reality.
And you have done that, and I assume you have enjoyed the experience of being in the virtual hobby, and if so, why?
Yeah, it's I think been really great. I think for two reasons. One is just what I said earlier about the people. It wasn't just there wasn't some magical link to all the existing people in the traveling face to face hobby. Like there's great people everywhere. So when you dip your toes in the pool of like the Diplomacy Variant Club or the Virtual World Diplomacy Community or what have you, there's a whole new crew of just wonderful people to interact with as well. A lot of them, hopefully, we're going to be bringing back some word games on the Carnage Discord one time before the Worlds in November. So, like, I think bonding with those people has been really great. And, like, I think it's it's just great having different modes of play available for different tastes and purposes. Not everyone is going to be able to easily gather enough people to play around them. So the virtual mode gives you a really distinct flavor from extended deadline play, which is also great for what it is. So, and now there's new modes like Speedboat and Blitz that have sprung up, and I think it's really great. That there's so much available to players now.
I'm sorry, but I can't let this go. You listened to Tanya Gill about how to do things. You've never listened to me, and I've known you a lot longer. I haven't got ever convinced you to do anything. I don't explain.
Well, I've listened to when I've had to play diplomacy at DixieCon, I've acceded to that. So I listen to you a fair bit.
All right, I'll accept that answer. Let's talk about World DipCon. Excitement is certainly building. The event's right around the corner at this point. Give us an idea of what attendees can expect at this year's Carnage tournament, the host event for the World DipCon.
Well, it's it's not going to be quite as glorious as I had hoped pre-pandemic, but that said, my hopes were astronomical pre-pandemic. So I think it's still going to be really, really great. We will have dinner Thursday night that may or may not be sponsored by Meta, so that would be nice because otherwise it'll be sponsored by me. Um, we've got a title belt, which is in the room, but I don't want to go walk over there. But first time in the hobby, I think there's ever been a championship belt. Um, we're going to have 4 full rounds, all time unlimited, which I think is also pretty unusual. Most tournaments have a final round that's capped at a certain point. Um, We've got international travelers. We've got a unique mix of players from before the pandemic versus the players that have sprung up and added themselves to the traveling hobby since the pandemic began. So I think it's going to be really fascinating because there'll be like a brilliant on boards. There'll be a brilliant mix of like Dan Lester and a Katie Gray, or like Andy Bartoloni and a Karthik Konath or whomever. Like it's going to be really fascinating to watch.
Yeah,
And
I was going to ask you. I was going to ask you what kind of players we could expect that DBN viewers may not be as familiar with because I haven't been playing much or at all during the virtual era. You've already mentioned Dan Lester, Andy Bartoloni. Tell us a little bit about who Dan Lester is. There'll be people that don't know Dan, like I do.
Dan Lester is an excellent player and a great friend who's succeeded in finishing second at Worlds many, many times. He ran an amazing event in Oxford for the World Championships in, I want to say, 2017.
That sounds right. Yeah.
And he's come over here. I introduced him to American barbecue, which was an awakening for him. Like apparently in Britain, it's a white tablecloth affair and tastes terrible. So there's at least one thing we're doing right over here.
Well, anything about the word barbecue is going to be right as long as we're involved in it. For those who have not looked into this, describe the structure. You mentioned 4 rounds, but describe the tournament structure and the scoring system just briefly.
So we're going to have 2 rounds Saturday, 2 rounds Friday, and 2 rounds Saturday, morning and evening. They're all going to be time unlimited, so you can play until you all agree to end or someone wins. The tournament the structure, the scoring system has been around for a while. It's a very, very, very simple system. Essentially, it's a lead-based system with a center-based tiebreaker, and solo victory is worth an overwhelming amount of points. So if you achieve a solo victory and get eliminated in all your other games, you're still going to finish ahead of anyone that had 4 big results that were not solos. That's the crux of what you would need to understand about the system.
And this is the Carnage gaming event is a multi-game event of which this is just part of it, taking place in Mount Snow, Vermont. What's the name of the resort again?
It's the Mount Snow Resort in Dover, Vermont. We're going to be in a ballroom in the Grand Summit. We're going to have our own space partitioned off from other gamers. In theory, I'm going to also have access to a PA system and a projector, although, I have to learn how to do it. But in theory, that's going to be available. And people who have the diplomacy badge will be able to, if should they get eliminated, go participate in other events if they so choose, or they could just hang out in the pool and hot tub. There's a lot of things to do.
How important do you think DipCon, World DipCon, face-to-face events in general are within the fabric of the diplomacy hobby?
I think they're extremely important. I don't want to be saying that they're above the other modes of play, because I see all the modes of play as co-equal as far as just having different gameplay experiences. But once the games end, I think the unique thing about face-to-face events is the bonding and camaraderie that you can't really get as much. Like I've had it to an extent on the Carnage Discord over the pandemic, but it's not the same as being able to just go out with people and hug people and talk to people. And I think that's what, like, I'm not any good as an organizer at player recruitment. I can admit that openly. But as far as player retention, which is at least as important, um, what keeps players coming back is not ultimately going to be the game itself. I had a talk with a Philadelphia area player, Joel, years ago, who had been, before he came to diplomacy, a fervent collectible card game player like Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh and whatnot. And he just found the culture to be miserable because he would show up, play a game. Everybody was dour and just very competitive, and then no one would talk to him, and then you just move on to the next match or you'd be done. Whereas in diplomacy, everybody wants to talk to everybody, everybody wants to hear everybody else's stories. And so I think what keeps people coming back, or not just myself, but many people I've heard the same similar reports from, is the unique bonding that you can have at face-to-face events that you don't really get in other media.
Do you think we have any challenges, or on the flip side of this, opportunities facing our hobby right now, in your view?
I think there's a lot of challenges. The primary one being the population size of the active players. Some of these discords have over 1,000 people, but it's always the same, 20 people that are super active. I think there's similarly, though, there's a lot of opportunities in that regard, because I think I'm conservatively on 15 diplomacy related discords or more, but I think from observing the activity on all of them, the Diplomacy Variant Club, I want to single out as a really good community that's not super toxic, that is collaborative, and people are excited to be playing in the games and experimenting with new ideas. So I think, and also now that Avalon Hill has a Discord, there's maybe a little budding nugget of contact with the company there, that I've been in touch sporadically with one of the Avalon Hill people. But I think there's opportunity, but what it ultimately is going to come down to is recruitment and retention, as it always has, and that's I think there's some promise there. Just recently, we had an event in Chicago that's been run in the past called Weaselmoot, but there was a first-time younger organizer, Sabia Huja, that put on a really, really spectacular event. And so that's I think, really, really promising for those of us that are getting long in the tooth.
Well, is there any other particular recent development in diplomacy that you find striking?
Let's see. I think the biggest one is from years ago now, but the biggest one is by far the code of conduct and the cultural sea change that it's engendered. We've lost a few players in the hobby as a consequence, but honestly, like, having people treat each other with respect is obviously more important over the long haul. So that's the biggest one. I think more recently, there's also the success of entities like the Virtual Diplomacy League, and then just very recently, Blitz springing up as a medium of play.
Fair. Is there any one thing you can think of that a hobbyist can do to help contribute to the hobby's strength and growth?
I think the best thing is recruitment. If people can get out and tell their friends, something I'm particularly terrible at, but if you can bring people in, like, I know there's like Eddie Brisson is famously very good at this, and so Tanya has been observably good at dragging people in. So I think if you're a recruiter, that's really great. If you get involved online, either as a player or an organizer, if you show up to at least local events, if not, even if you're not able to travel, if you can, go to your club events or form a club if you don't have one. Like, there's a lot of ways to participate that will better the hobby.
For someone watching this who has not yet signed up for World DipCon at Carnage coming up in the beginning of November, is it too late?
It is not too late. You'll need to contact me if you want to, like, me to crowbar you into lodging in the main building. But there's lodging still lodging nearby in condos, and one of my buddies got a Airbnb, I understand. So there's lodging around. And yeah, you can still register. And we'd love to have you. It's There's already, in the last week or so, just been several people coming out of the woodwork that I wasn't expecting to sign up. So that's been great, and hopefully we'll have a big, good event that everybody will enjoy.
What is the best way for someone to contact you about signing up or getting more information?
The best way I would say is to get on the Carnage Diplomacy Discord, which you can find links to. You can find a link to on the North American Diplomacy Federation Discord. You can also, find me on pretty much any of the the major diplomacy discords. Like I'm on Nexus, Leagues, I'm on Virtual World Diplomacy Community, I'm on Diplomacy Variant Club. So, and I don't have any pseudonym for my Discord handle. It's always Maletsky. So it should be very easy to find me if you're on Discord.
Well, there are people watching this that are going to say Discord. What's Discord? So
Yeah,
is there an email address they could use?
yes.
Maybe?
If you go to www.carnagecon.com, they'll also have contact information for me under the diplomacy section of their website. But just for everyone's edification, it's dmaletsky0@gmail.com, and it's spelled Maletsky.
Appreciate that. Any final thoughts for our DBN land audience?
Just the one new trend. Well, it's not so new, but the one trend I've seen in virtual players that's I hope passes over time is there's several players who really wrap and this has been going on in face to face for a long time, but like if you wrap up your ego or self-worth or what have you into your game results, it's the surest path to burnout. So I would say perform your best and get out there and compete as skillfully as you can, but once the game's over, don't beat yourself up too much. Just like learn some lessons and move along. I think HitCon, an event you're intimately familiar with, is one of my favorite gaming environments for that exact reason, that everyone that shows up goes to play games and they're brilliant and competitive, but when the game's over, there's no hard feelings, especially against oneself.
Fair. Well, I appreciate you being on the show, Dave, and thanks for those comments.
Yep. Thank you.
And now for our panel discussion. In order to master the play of diplomacy, one must develop certain skills, such as interpersonal communication, strategic analysis, and emotional control. Can we take what we learn in diplomacy and use it in our everyday lives? Or should we leave our dip experiences on the board because the behavior it takes to succeed is not appropriate outside of the game itself? Let's delve into these ideas with three experienced diplomacy hobbyists. Steve Cooley of Massachusetts, a dip player since the postal days of the hobby and the winner of the 2019 North American DipCon. We also have Natty Schaefer of Utah, host of the Masterclass series of diplomacy-related lectures on the VWDC Discord server. And we have British Columbia resident Riaz Varani, a longtime face-to-face player and organizer who has also reached the Nexus Online Tournament Finals. Riaz, let's start with you, if that's all right. Tell the viewers a little about how you started in diplomacy and what the hobby means to you.
Sure. I started playing by email and specifically on a site that Steve probably knows very well or remembers very well, Redscape. And I learned through playing by email about how you can layer multiple or put it together multiple layers of deception and really trick people. And then I caught the face-to-face bug, and all of a sudden I realized I don't have time for this anymore. I don't have time for that level of multi-layer stuff. So once I caught the face-to-face bug, I started doing a whole bunch of stuff in the West Coast. And that really ties in with what diplomacy means to me because, as many of us do, my wife and I, we had a couple of beautiful children, took some time off and came back to it. And I really found that I missed diplomacy. And it wasn't like a come back one time and then disappear again for a couple of years. It was like, I got to keep playing this because this is just way too much fun.
Which it is. Natty, same question to you.
I started playing probably early college. I was recommended the game by a game salesman at a gaming store. So I ended up buying it, playing it with friends, and I really, really liked it. But finding exactly 6 friends to play was impossible. So we maybe played it twice, and I started searching around for places to play it online. And I did that for a while. But then when I went to law school, I thought, I need to put this behind me. I need to focus on my studies. And I more or less forgot about it until the pandemic of 2020. I was looking for things to do. Bill Hackenbrecht found me and recruited me for Liberty Cup. And I played that and had a lot of fun and have been more or less playing since 2020 again.
We're great, and it's great to have you. Steve, you and I started playing together in the mid 80s in the postal era. I remember that. Remember, no, there's no reason to hide it. It's all out there in the open if somebody wanted to find it on the interwebs. So we might as well own up to it. Tell us not only about, when you started playing and how, but tell us how your participation has changed over the years, since you've been in the hobby for such a long time.
Well, my first game was actually while I was in the military, just a group of guys, and we started playing, and it almost destroyed our lives. So because we didn't play in a single setting. We were playing like, let's just play a move every couple of days. What a horrible idea that was, right? Because now we're just ignoring our families and everything and just always talking the game, and that didn't go real well. But over time, as you said, I started playing by mail, and then I found out there were conventions in Southern California, started playing those, wound up taking a trip out to North Carolina to embarrass myself out there. It wasn't that bad the first time, but
no, it really wasn't, guys. You can go look it up. He didn't do that poorly, but keep going, Steve.
I played email, like Riaz was saying. By the way, I just had lunch a couple weeks ago with Monty and Brad Bosca from Redscape. Couple of players there. We had a great time. Started playing a lot, and Riaz really undersells himself because I would play games with him and a guy named Bobby Orange, and those two guys, I would like go out of my mind trying to figure out what they were doing, and so he was great. And then so email, but I just like playing face to face. I tried virtual a couple times. If I'm being honest, hated it. Because the way I put it is, it has all the disadvantages of email, all the disadvantages of face to face, and none of their advantages. So, I mean, to me, it's like the worst of all worlds. Doesn't even really feel like diplomacy to me. So, I'm looking forward to playing more face to face.
All right, Mr. Crotchety, let me stay with you for just a minute. Do you believe that in general, diplomacy skills have particular application to life outside of our hobby?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if I could let's put it this way, for every married man, if I could get them to play diplomacy, because you learn a few things, or you should learn if you're going to get any good. One of the things is, what's going to happen when I say this, right? And so if a husband could learn that in the real world, what's going to happen when I say this? He'd say a lot less stupid stuff, if I could put it that way. I guess I'm doing like counseling right here. So, I mean, it's true. If you just think, because this is what we do when we play, you have like that little filter that just goes, yeah, I probably wouldn't say that if I were you. Me being me, and it helps. It helps a lot. Helps in every situation, but particularly, I think, in close relationships, helps in a lot of ways.
Riaz, is there one particular example of a lesson from diplomacy you think that folk could really use in real life?
Definitely. Especially, for me, it's the one that has come in most handy for me has been learning what people truly want, like what they're saying versus what they actually want. And that comes in diplomacy a lot of times, like, the England that asks for Belgium when you're France or Germany, like, Why do they really want that army in there? Are they really looking to work with you or against you? Or oftentimes in games where you get to a mid game and all of a sudden people start saying, you know what, let's switch things up. Are they really doing that? Or do they just want your side of the alliance to crumble? You know, these types of things have really translate really well on the business side of things, because when we're sitting in meetings, what is it that person really wants? Is it that they want more money, or is it that they want more? I mean, everybody typically wants more money, but is that what it is, or do they want another job? And if they want another job, then you know what, that makes a lot of difference.
Makes sense. Natty, let me go over to you. Communication is something that perhaps people might think would be transferable. Do you think that we learn in diplomacy negotiation skills, bilateral negotiation, multilateral negotiation? Do you think we learn skills that are in fact transferable to the real world?
Yes, I can tell you that I do use things I learned in negotiation, practice my skills in negotiation in diplomacy that help me when I'm meeting with other lawyers, opposing counsel. You you learn in diplomacy a couple things. First off, you can't get something if you don't ask for it, and sometimes people are too shy to ask for it, and it's very helpful to just get that out of the way, to get comfortable with going to a lawyer and opposing counsel and saying, this is what I want. Can you meet me there? And sometimes you will get literally laughed at, but that doesn't, you develop a thicker skin when you play a lot of diplomacy, that having a hard ask isn't the worst thing in the world, and getting laughed at isn't the worst thing in the world. But sometimes you get a yes, and getting a yes and getting follow through is very helpful. And the other thing you learn about negotiation in court, it's not official until the judge accepts it. And in diplomacy, it's not official until the orders are in and are being adjudicated.
Are there any other ways? I mean, you're a lawyer, Natty. Are there any other ways in which you think diplomacy skills help you in your career?
I would say there's a little voice in my head that didn't used to be there about when I'm being lied to by opposing counsel. There is certain tells that you just can't exactly describe, but you find them being a little too solicitous, a little too nice, and you and I say to myself, why is opposing counsel being so nice to me at this moment? And at those times, I've been able to drive a harder bargain because I know they're lying about something, or at least have not committed myself to something that they're not being entirely forthright about.
Makes sense. Steve, in your career, you are a pastor in the Protestant Christian tradition. Is there anything about diplomacy that you can use in your line of work?
Well, I think there are a few things. One is, like Natty was just saying, there is that small voice in my head that tells me when people are not telling the truth, right? Or sometimes I just come across a situation and I think there's more to it than appears on the surface, right? But I think it's also helpful in just listening to people, as Riaz was saying. Well, I guess let me just stop there and saying just listening to people, learning to really listen to what they're saying. And sometimes it's what they're not saying. Often in couples counseling, what is not being said is more powerful than what is being said. You know, if a wife's not telling me how she feels valued and, those kind of things, it's a big tell, right? If the husband's dominating the conversation, that's a big tell. And these are the kind of things that you learn while you're working with allies during the game too. You listen to them and you can hear what they're not saying, what they're not telling you, what pieces they're not referring to, what promises they're not willing to make. So all those kind of things help. I think if there was, again, I don't want to just sell the game, but if there's one game I could get people to play, it would be diplomacy. It teaches more about real life than I think any other game does.
Riaz, let's round out this tour of our careers here. You're a real estate developer, and you've already mentioned how diplomacy might be of relevance in, sitting at the table and trying to figure out what people want. Any other ways in which you think the game has helped you or will help you in your career?
Definitely. I would say building rapport. A lot of times, most people before Spring '01, they already know who they want to work with, and chances are that if somebody wants to work with you, it's because of something that you've said or done, or a way that they've made you feel, so that you feel fairly trustworthy and you feel like somebody that somebody can work with for a few years. And it's the same thing in my field. When we're launching a new project, when we're going through sales, a lot of times people want to meet the person who actually owns the project and who they're buying from. And that first impression is so important. If somebody comes in and I make some sort of blunder, or they don't feel inherently comfortable with me and feel like this is the right person, I lose a sale. And they're not easy to find. Just like in diplomacy, it's not easy to find a good alliance and a good ally. And when you get one, you want to try to keep them as much as you can.
That's interesting. Although highly theoretical or hypothetical that Riaz would make a blunder. But let me follow up with you, Riaz. So diplomacy players obviously sometimes are duplicitous. I assume you do not endorse using duplicity in real life, do you?
Okay, so first of all, I had to look that word up on Google just to see exactly what it meant. So that was very good. That was a good lesson for me. Secondly, I think that there are times and places for duplicity. For example, when you're in a negotiation, there may be times when you may want to throw somebody off of what you want on a specific term to get what you really need. So that is a form of deceit, but not one that is designed to really hurt somebody. Just one to try to get what you want in a way that everybody wins. I think there's never any solid rules towards anything. You may want to deceive somebody to if you think that they're going to do harm to somebody else. There are times and places for that, but on an everyday level and dealing with people on an everyday level, we all have to sleep at night. So I would say that you are correct, that duplicity is not something that I'd condone on an everyday basis.
Yeah, I kind of thought you might say that, and I agree. Steve, do you think there is a way we can avoid any seepage of any unsavory diplomacy habits that we have? Don't want to seep those into our regular lives. How do we stop that?
Well, I would say basically it's by having a conscience, right? But what's funny is people will say all the time I just was talking to some kids here recently. They hear about diplomacy and they think it's great because they're going to be able to lie to everybody. And I'm like, well, hold on there, because if you do that, you're going to have some real problems. And if you lie, like Riaz was saying, if you lie in real life, you're going to have some real problems. I think, first of all, the conscience thing is a big detour. It detours you from doing that sort of thing. But I would say the other side of the coin is there are times when you don't want to reveal everything, right? I had a situation recently where I did not want to reveal a source of my information. So you could call this duplicity if you want. I used somebody else contacting me as the means by introducing evidence and I kept the initiator or the person who gave me the evidence completely out of the situation, for her own safety, more or less. And so did I feel bad about that? No, because I didn't lie to anybody. I just didn't, reveal the whole truth because it wasn't really beneficial to anyone. So I think, there's a certain amount of play acting in diplomacy, and I think that's part of what that was to an effect. If I could just say one more thing about diplomacy generally, I think one of the things that I've learned professionally is how to attenuate, dial down somebody else's emotions, right? I mean, I used to deal with rapists, murderers, and thieves all the time in the prison. And I think in, 21-year career, both on the streets and in the jails, I think I probably had about 3 fights. I just didn't fight. And it wasn't because I ran away. It's because people would start at a 10 or a 9, and I would dial them down to a 7 and then down to a 5. And, and eventually we would get along like professionals, which is what I would try to encourage them to do. I'd say sometimes to them, you be a professional crook and I'll be a professional cop and we'll just get along, so I attribute that to diplomacy. It's learning how to, as you're talking to somebody, either kind of ramp them up if you need them to go up or bring them down. I guess that's kind of manipulation, isn't it? Is that bad?
No, but Steve, the next time that you're tempted to jump into the Black Sea and Armenia to my Russia, I'm just going to dial you down. You're
Okay,
at a
it
10.
works.
I'm going to dial you down to an 8. I'm going to get you down to a 6 and into a 3. And then I'm going to go to the Black Sea instead.
That'll be fine.
Okay.
I'm fine with that.
All right. Good.
I like you in the Black Sea.
I would be good for you there.
All right.
Natty, it's okay to backstab me in a diplomacy game, or at least a lot of people would say so. Is it okay to backstab people in the real world? What do you think?
I think you should be really judicious about doing that in the real world. My professional circle isn't that big. There aren't that many lawyers in my state, and there probably aren't that many lawyers in your state, David. And if you develop a reputation as a backstabber, that'll follow you around. You will meet someone who is unwilling to work with you. And it's really going to bite you if you develop a reputation as backstabbing. So I would say it's best to avoid it entirely if you can. I can't think of a situation where that would really be helpful.
Well, I'll let you think about it some more. Maybe you'll come up with one. Steve, final thoughts from you about applying diplomacy lessons to one's non-diplomacy world.
I think the key word I would just say is communication. If a good diplomacy player can communicate, whether it's written, as in emails, or whether it's orally, and sometimes even in a face-to-face game, there is there's a physical aspect to it too. Where you don't want to, you can go wrong with intimidating people, but sometimes it's the right thing to do. And sometimes, touching somebody is absolutely wrong. Sometimes it's okay. You have to figure this out. But I think it's really key, or a key aspect of it is communication. And people who don't communicate well make really poor diplomacy players. So
Indeed.
That's the reality.
Indeed. Natty, how about final thoughts from you?
The best diplomacy players realize they're not just playing pieces on the board. They're also trying to deal with the personalities of those around them. And when it comes to the legal profession, you have to deal with personalities when it comes to opposing counsel, when it comes to judges. And what judge would accept is not necessarily what another judge would accept. And so you have to be flexible in real life, and you need to be flexible in diplomacy and not become rigid in which strategies, which tactics you're going to use, and instead use them to your advantage to deal with the personalities that you're playing with.
It's good advice. Riaz, give us a final piece of advice from you then about how we use lessons from the game of diplomacy in the game of life.
Sure. I would say communication and interpersonal skills, really developing your interpersonal skills through diplomacy, as Steve had mentioned earlier, communication and hard work, because these are all things that will pay off, both professionally and in your own relationships in your personal life, right? I mean, we've all seen that the effort that we put into relationships in real life, what we put into them is what we get out of them.
That's absolutely correct. Thanks, guys, for being on the show. Thanks very much. And thanks to all of you watching at home. We hope you have enjoyed this broadcast of Deadline. If you have any news, ideas for features, or feedback of any kind, please feel free to send an email to info@diplobn.com or you can drop me a line using the email davidhood@dixiecon.com. For our other broadcast offerings, visit our website at diplobn.com. This is David Hood signing off. I wish you brightness and bliss and, of course, Belgium.